I'm so sorry. I missed Fantasy Fiction First Friday this month. It's just so crazy, busy, hectic, you know. I've got 4 birthdays, mine included, and Christmas, and then a wedding anniversary, all back to back. So I didn't record it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start over with The House on G Street, starting in January 2024. And we'll call it Season 2 of Fantasy Fiction First Friday. In my book, The House on G Street, that we're going to be starting in January, there is the main character. Well, I mean, she's not the main character, but she's like eternally the main character. Anyway, she's an actress from the early 1900s. And when I was writing this book, I did a whole lot of research and went down a whole lot of rabbit holes, just trying to kind of get a feel of what that world in that era was like. And I came across a whole lot of names, but today's story, I never came across her name. Oh, no. Actually, I came across her name on a TikTok that came across my For You page. And I was like, oh, she sounds interesting. And I looked her up and I went down a rabbit hole. Girl, strap in or strap on, because this story is taking us for a ride. So she has been called the Dark Menace. Vanity Fair called her a femme fatale. One of her friends called her the Black Angel of Death. Libby Holman, the life of the party. At 5'6" and 124 pounds, she was nearsighted and gap-toothed. One of her friends said that she looked like she'd been chewing on a shoe her entire life. Some friend. It's been said that her life is the story that movies are ripe for. And a few movies were based on her. And songs. And books. Libby herself said that singers don't have love lives. They inspire them. And then said, hold my beer. Okay, so you know how like a few years back, people would say like Hillary Clinton eats scandal for breakfast. I mean, that may be true and all, but Libby, scandal was in her DNA. Let's get into it. So Libby's parents were fabulously wealthy and had made quite the name for themselves until 1904, when Libby's uncle embezzled all of their money, a total of $1 million. That's $35 million in today's money. He just took it and ran off, never to be seen again, left the family entirely broke. And I mean, everybody talked about it. It was all anybody talked about. This is when Libby was born, and what she was born into. Her uncle. In 1923, Libby graduated from the University of Cincinnati with a Bachelor of Arts, and she had caught the bug, the curse. If you know, you know. So she moved to New York. And another strange parallel to my book. My character also caught the bug, but she didn't move to New York. My character moved to a young, budding frontier town called Hollywood Land. When Libby got to New York, she was living at the YWCA, you know, like that YMCA. Yeah, they had a women's chapter too. And she studied at Cambridge, but she didn't have a lot of money. You know, even staying at the YMCA or the YWCA, which is very affordable, New York is still very expensive. So she needed to get a job. We went to work for the infamous Polly Adler as her madame. If you don't know what that means, Polly was her pimp. No judgment, no judgment. But Polly said of Libby that she was almost pragmatic about her work. She would show up every day, on time, straight to business, wearing her college uniform and a little tattered black beret, and she made sure to be home by curfew every night at 11 p.m. It was during this time that she caught the eye of one Channing Pollock. I love these freaking names. And it was Channing who encouraged her to drop out of Cambridge and pursue acting full time. And that's exactly what she did. And she became quite a well-known torch singer. Now, what's a torch singer? It's a singer that sings about carrying a torch or a crush or an unrequited love, kind of a bluesy feel, almost comical, very risque, and she did quite well. I later say of this time, when you're 21, there's so much to do and so much time to do it. And I did almost anything that popped into my head. It was fantastically exhausting, and I wanted more. I wanted more of everything, all the time. Now, if that isn't the best description of youth I've ever heard, because same, girl, same. Ah, life is good when you're young. In 1929, she met Louisa, aka Jenny, of the DuPont family. Yeah, DuPont. Like, you know, the Teflon that kills birds, DuPont. At a horse show. A friend of hers, Clifton, had introduced them. Louisa was a Follies girl. She had been in her first film at only 15. In 1925, she married a footballer and was divorced by 28. Never had any kids, but at one point did receive a Academy Award nomination. And the two of them became fast friends. And when I say friends, I mean like bestest friends. They did everything together and they went everywhere together, and they were openly intimate with each other. Now, Libby throughout her life would take on several female lovers, but Louisa was the one that was the for life for her. These two, they were on society's front page. They were socialites. They were actresses and socialites, and came from very well-known families and had very well-known names. And they would dress up in men's tailored suits, complete with hats, and go out on the town, knowing full well that they would be photographed, knowing the backlash that they would receive. And how freaking iconic. This is during a time when people were required by law to wear a certain amount of articles of clothing that corresponded with the sex they were assigned at birth. And they would go out in full men's garbs, ready to be photographed. This is one of the ways that civil disobedience shows itself. I mean, they used their platform to make a statement without saying a word at all. And they had fun doing it. And on top of that, girl, they look good. Now, fashion was something that was not foreign to Libby at all. As a matter of fact, some credit her for inventing the strapless gown, which became her signature look. Now, she didn't invent the strapless gown. She didn't even design the strapless gown, but she did make it trend. Influencer. And can I just say, thank you so much, Libby. I love strapless. I can't stand the way anything feels up on my shoulders. It's so uncomfortable. All summer long, I am strapless, and I am allowed to do so in part because of you, and I love you for it. Then one day, this young man catches her show. And his name was Zachary Smith Reynolds of the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Empire. Now, Zachary Smith, or Smith we'll call him, he received quite a nice monthly allowance and also had a private jet. And this once former playboy became so smitten with Libby that he would use his private jet to follow her around the world. I mean, he straight up stalked her ass. Now, she found him completely preposterous and treated him like he was a complete moron. And then proceeded to do what she did. She married him. I mean, he had put it to his head and threatened to pew himself if she didn't. He had wanted her to stay at home and had expected her to be an at-home bride and, barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and all that. And she tried it for about a year. But yeah, no, you couldn't keep Libby down. No. Anyway, she announced, we're having a baby. and a party. It was the 4th of July, so of course, you know, they were living the high life. They threw a huge party, and all of her friends and all of his family were in attendance, and the night ended with a crash and a scream and the feeling of warm blood. Smith didn't survive. In fact, Libby and her alleged lover were indicted for murder. Murder, darling, murder. Now, the Reynolds family, they were like, oh, no, 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 no. You know, this is during a time where the tobacco industry was really, really booming. Women had just been allowed the privilege of smoking, and a wonderful marketing campaign had come out about how to stay thin was through cigarettes. And so, yeah, and they were doing really, really well financially, and they could not have a scandal, you know, tarnishing their good name. So, you know, with that kind of wealth comes a lot of power and influence. And the Reynolds family used that power and influence to have the cause of death be death by either self-inflicted or caused by party or parties. And with that, they were able to influence the authorities to drop the charges. Now, Libby had maintained that she had not been drunk that night, but she couldn't remember what had happened because of the traumatic events of the evening. Left her with a state of amnesia. Some of her guests who were at the party said that they heard the shot and screaming, and that Libby was screaming, Smith had shot himself, Smith had shot himself. But other of the guests also claimed that not only had Libby been drinking, but she had been drinking quite heavily. Now, what really happened on that evening, I guess we'll just never know. Not long after that, she gave birth to her son, Christopher. He was quite premature and weighed only 3.5 pounds, and she lovingly called him Topper. And in attempts to get away from the Reynolds family and from this scandal, she went to live with Louisa. And they lived together and raised Topper as an infant, as a family. Reporters would call it a busted marriage. But, you know, I mean, like I said before, Libby and Louisa were never really in the closet. So Topper, being the son and the grandson and an heir of the Reynolds empire, received quite a hefty inheritance. And Libby, I don't know why I keep wanting to say Louisa, Libby was also set up financially. I mean, like, the two of them, they were never, ever gonna have to worry about money. Till Libby met a young man named Phillips. Now, Phillips was incredibly beautiful, but not rich, but not that that mattered because she had more than enough. But he was incredibly beautiful and 5 years younger than her. It wouldn't be long before Libby ordered Phillips from her home. You see, while he had been away shooting on location, she had been doing his brother. The brother, Rafe, God, such a sexy name, was 11 years younger than Libby. Now, this was, right around 1939, 1940s, when the brothers joined the Royal Canadian Armed Forces, or Air Force. I'm not sure. They were Canadian, and this was right around the beginning of World War II. So they went off together. Unfortunately, Phillips would not return home as he was in a passenger plane that crashed into another passenger plane, leaving no survivors. And when Rafe came home from the war, he came home pretty much a broken shell of a human. He had undiagnosed and untreated PTSD. He drank incessantly. He was reported to be taking up to 8 sleeping pills a night. And, you know, Libby, who had a praise kink, and her love language was also to be very disparaging towards her men, obviously couldn't be disparaging to Rafe in this condition. But also he couldn't give her what she needed either. So neither of them were getting their needs fulfilled. And she once said that Rafe had the largest cock in Connecticut, but no ass to go with it. You know, like whiskey dick. So there was like no intimacy there either. 6 weeks after Rafe moved out, his body was found in the apartment or hotel that he had been staying in And the report said that he had passed 6 days earlier due to an apparent overdose. Topper had been away at prep school, and Libby decided to adopt 2 more children. She adopted 2 little boys. And then after Topper graduated, he came home and he was like, "Oh, I have a fine idea, mother." And his mom was like, "What's that?" And he was like, "I'm going to go rock climbing with my friend. We're going to take a little excursion." And she was like, "That is a fine idea. Remember to wear clean underwear," and all of that. And letting him go on that trip was one thing that she would absolutely never forgive herself for, because in a tragic rock climbing accident, Topper and his friend fell to their deaths. They hung his photo outside of her room, right next to photographs of Reynolds, Phillips, and Wraith. She called it her gallery of romantic homicide. She also started a foundation in Topper's memory that focused on civil rights issues. She donated the foundation donated over $3 million to civil rights causes. She said that it was her greatest achievement. In fact, the foundation financed Dr. Martin Luther King's trip to India, and she got to meet the King family, and they became fast friends, and she was incredibly fond of Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife. And she started up a experimental theater. And another weird parallel, I swear to God, I never studied this one before this week. In my book, my actress of the 1900s, when she got to that age where she was kind of not so easily employable, washed up or whatever, started her own theater. Anyway, Libby started an experimental theater, and this is where she met and was mentoring Montgomery Clift. Montgomery was 17 years younger than she when they became entangled, and she was his mentor. And, you know, I mean, Louisa had always been there and was always a part of Libby's life, but I think one of the biggest things that made for Montgomery and Libby to be strange bedfellows was that Montgomery Clift was also gay. And even though Louisa was her best friend with benefits for life, she said that Montgomery was the greatest love of her life, and they were dedicated to each other, almost devoted to each other, for nearly a decade. So Libby had referred to herself, after so much loss, she referred to herself as the master of melancholy. And I think in an act of SH, she married a painter who treated her like trash. One of their live-in employees said that out of all of her husbands, he was the one she ought to kill. In 1966, Montgomery Clift passed. And then, of course, in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, which, you know, affected her very, very deeply, on top of all the other losses she had in her life. In 1971, Libby was found slouched over the steering wheel of her Rolls Royce. She was 67. Her $13 million estate was left to the foundation. I don't know why it was not left to her 2 adopted children that survived her, but it was left to the estate. And she left behind a very long list of very impressive credits, some of which we'll never even hear because they were banned for being too risque. Her credits include in 1929, I Am Blue charted in the U.S. charts at 4. Moan and Low charted at 5. Find Me a Primitive Man charted at 19. In 1930, Why Was I Born charted at 19. Body and Soul charted at 3. And Something to Remember You By charted at 6. In 1931, Love for Sale charted at 5. I Am One of God's Children charted at 14. You and the Night and the Music charted at 11. Her theater and Broadway credits included in 1925 The Sapphire Ring and The Garrick Gaieties, in 1926 The Greenwich Village Follies, in 1927 Merry Go Round, in 1928 Rainbow, in 1929 in 1929 Ned, Wade Burns Gamble's and The Little Show. In 1930, Three's a Crowd. In 1934, Revenge with Music. In 1938, You Never Know. And in 1954, Blues, Ballads, and Sin Songs. Rest in peace, Libby. Divine Libby. Wonderful Libby. Beautiful Libby. Love, love, Libby. So my name is Genevieve Gravel, and you've been watching Gigi Says What Now, where I talk trash about history. If you liked this story, or if you're into the supernatural or fantasy fiction, please, please, please hit all those buttons, and I will see you next time. Remember, you are valid, you are worthy, and you are loved.